Hi friends, how are you today? I hope you are doing well because we are about to go for a little walk in the woods. We all know the story of Little Red Riding Hood, right? The dark little fairy tale that's basically don't talk to strangers, don't go into the forest, and maybe listen to your mother sometimes. But what if the big bad wolf wasn't just a story? What if he was real? Because for one 12-year-old girl in the Welsh countryside, he absolutely was. This is one of the most haunting cold cases Wales has ever seen. A murder that stayed a complete mystery for over 75 years. We've got huge manhunts, suspects named and shamed, and then cleared by science that didn't even exist back then. And a very strong theory that the real killer was hiding in plain sight the whole time. So yeah, buckle up. Picture this. It's June the 27th, 1946. A bright, bubbly 12-year-old girl named Muriel Drinkwater gets over a school bus. She's wearing her school uniform, carrying her satchel, and she has about a 1-mile walk home along a path that cuts through Penllergaer Woods, a forest she's walked through so many times she could probably do it with her eyes closed. Back at her family farmhouse, her mom Margaret is watching from the window. She can see Muriel as this tiny little figure moving along the edge of this huge woodland, and then Muriel turns a corner and she disappears into the trees. And that is it. That's the last time her mom ever sees her. Muriel doesn't come home. She doesn't show up anywhere else. And for almost 80 years, nobody knew who she met in those woods. But here's the part that makes my brain itch. What if the police, who launched one of the biggest manhunts Wales had ever seen, were looking for the wrong man from the very beginning? So, who was Muriel Joan Drinkwater? Muriel was one of those kids everyone has assumed was going to do something amazing with her life. She was 12, she'd already passed the exams to get into a good grammar school, she wanted to be a teacher, and she was super musical. Her family called her the Little Nightingale because she was always singing. That was her thing. On that Thursday afternoon, she was singing on the bus with her friends. When she got off at her usual stop and started walking home, people still heard her humming to herself as she went along the path towards her parents' farm outside Swansea in South Wales. The path ran through Penllergaer Woods, which back then this was really beautiful, quiet woodland. Very storybook, very you'd never think something horrible would happen here. On the way home, she passes a 13-year-old local boy, her neighbour, Hubert Hoyles. He'd just been up to the farm to buy eggs from her mom. He later tells police that he saw Muriel on her path. They say hello, everything seemed completely normal. And that is the last confirmed sighting of Muriel alive. When she doesn't show up at home, her mom Margaret does what every mom does at first. She tries to talk herself out of the panic. Maybe the bus was late, maybe Muriel stopped to chat, maybe she's at neighbors. But as the hours pass, that little worry turns into full-blown dread. Margaret goes to look for her, asks around the village, and eventually calls the police. A search party forms quickly. Local men, farm workers, police officers, all with lanterns and flashlights, moving through the woods in the dark, calling her name. They search all night. The next day, deep in the trees and heartbreakingly close to her home, an inspector finds Muriel's body. She had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and shot twice in the chest. She was 12. The fairy tale Big Bad Wolf had just become very real. The whole community just froze. People were terrified to let their children out of their sight. The press jumped on the case and gave it a name that would stick for decades: the Little Red Riding Hood murder. The hunt for Muriel's killer was immediate and huge. Local police were overwhelmed, so detectives from Scotland Yard were brought in to take over. They were like, okay, this is not just a local problem, this is serious. Now, in your original fairy tale, Little Red Riding Hood gets eaten by a wolf. In this version, the wolf might have been a man with a gun. Muriel had been shot with a .45 caliber weapon, the kind commonly used by American servicemen in World War II. There had been US troops stationed in the area during and after the war, so one of the very first theories in the file is, was her killer an American soldier? Years later, and this is important, it was years later, not during the first search, people clearing or searching a nearby area found a discarded Colt .45 pistol. It matched the type of weapon used to kill Muriel, and the discovery really boosted the soldier theory. But it was never conclusively proven to be the murder weapon. It was the right kind of gun in the right kind of place, but no solid forensic link. The investigation itself was enormous for its time. Police went door to door across the region and interviewed more than 20,000 men. 20,000! They put out a description of a possible suspect. A man in his 30s with a thick, fluffy hair, wearing a light brown sports jacket. People were stopped on roads, questioned in their homes, checked at factories and camps, but even after all of that, nobody was ever charged. And then the rumors started, because of course they did. The last person known to have seen Muriel alive, 13-year-old Hubert, the neighbor boy, had to live with whispers and suspicion for decades. People in the area quietly wondered if he'd done something. Imagine being a child, losing your friend, and then spending your entire adult life with people sightseeing you over a murder you didn't commit. Then there was another name, and this one is genuinely scary. Harold Jones. Harold was a convinced double child killer from the 1920s. He'd murdered 2 young girls when he was only a teenager himself. He served time, then he was released in 1941 and eventually ended up living in the same general area where Muriel was killed. So for a long time, a lot of people look at that and went, okay, come on, same region, same type of victim, same general age, it has to be him. He became this really popular, very speculative suspect in books and TV shows. But here's the thing, despite all the talk, there was never any hard evidence connecting him to Muriel. It was always a theory. And then the case went cold, properly cold. Evidence went into storage, witnesses aged, people died, and that could have been the end of the story. Until science decided to make a dramatic entrance. In 2008, more than 60 years after the murder, a cold case review team went digging through old police storage. And they found something everyone thought was long gone: Muriel's school uniform. Her clothing had been kept all along, just tucked away and forgotten among old exhibits. When the forensic team looked at her blue school uniform coat, they noticed something the original investigators had done. They'd literally drawn a yellow ring, like a crayon circle, around a stain on the back of the coat. Very low-tech, very 1940s crime lab. But you know what? It worked. Because modern forensic scientists took samples from that exact marked area and, using DNA technology that would have sounded like science fiction in 1946, they pulled a full DNA profile of an unknown man. Like, that is wild. Imagine being the cold case detective in that moment. They ran the profile through the national database. They hoped for that big dramatic match moment. And nothing. No hit, no name, no neat little gotcha. But the DNA did do something incredibly important. It cleared people. First, it officially cleared poor Hubert, the neighbor boy who'd lived right under that cloud of suspicion for most of his life. He died in 2004, before the DNA test, so he never got to hear it himself. But police publicly said he was not the killer. And then in 2019, police also announced that the DNA categorically ruled out Harold Jones, the double child killer, not Muriel murderer. So two of the main suspects people had been side-eyeing for decades were innocent in this case. The wolf was someone else entirely. Which brings us to the question. If it wasn't the neighbor boy, and if it wasn't the known child killer, then who was it? With their best-known suspects cleared, detectives were basically back to square one. Except now they had a very real DNA profile and absolutely no name to attach to it. Then in 2020, BBC Wales released a documentary that dropped a new theory into the mix. And honestly, it's one of those theories that just sits in your stomach. They focused on a man named Ronald Harris. Ronald Harris was not some random name pulled out of a hat. In 1954, 8 years after Muriel was killed, he was hanged for a brutal double murder. His victims? An older couple, his own relatives. The reason? A furious argument when they refused to let him use their car, mixed with robbery. He snapped, attacked them with a hammer, and killed them in a way that showed a lot of rage and overkill. So we already know this is someone capable of extreme violence. That alone might not mean much, right? There are lots of violent people in the world. But the BBC team kept digging and found a tiny detail in an old newspaper that everyone has missing for decades. It said that before all of that, before the car argument, before the double murder, Ronnie Harris had worked as a laborer on Muriel's family farm. Let that sink in for a second. He knew the family, he knew the land. He would have known the path, the timings, the routine, including the fact that every school day a 12-year-old girl walked home alone through the woods back to that farm. Suddenly, this is not some random killer passing through. This is someone who could have been watching her routines for weeks. A relative of Harry's who spoke to the documentary described him as childish and resentful of people he thought were cleverer than him. And Muriel? She was a bright grammar school girl on her way up in life. Exactly the type of person someone insecure and angry might fixate on and resent. For years, the police had chased the idea of a stranger. Maybe a foreign soldier who vanished after the war, maybe a passing man with a gun. But what if the killer wasn't a stranger at all? What if he was the guy from down the road who'd already worked on her parents' land? In that version of the story, the Colt 45 found years later might just be a distraction. A red herring that pulled everyone's eye in the wrong direction while the real wolf lived and worked right there among them. And that's a horrible thought. Here's the frustrating part. Even though the Ronnie Harris theory is really compelling, the murder of Muriel Drinkwater is still officially unsolved. We have a full DNA profile from Muriel's coat, a known executed killer who worked on her family farm, and a pattern of extreme violence in his later crime. But we do not have a direct forensic link. After the BBC documentary, it was reported that police were looking at taking DNA from Harry's surviving relatives to see if there was a possible familial match to the profile from Muriel's coat. If those tests did happen, the results have never been made public. No big press conference, no case closed, just silence. So we are left with two competing stories. Story 1. A stranger in the woods, maybe a serviceman with a Colt 45 who attacked a girl, disappeared, and left behind nothing but terror and unanswered questions. Story 2. A local man, already proven capable of brutal murder, who knew the family, knew the land, and might have used that knowledge to hunt a 12-year-old girl on her way home from school. Either way, the Little Red Riding Hood of this story never got her happy ending. Muriel's murder left a permanent scar on her family and on the community around Penllergaer. Her sister later spoke about how deeply it affected them for the rest of their lives. Which, of course, it did. How could it not? For more than 75 years, the ghost of the Little Red Riding Hood killer has haunted those Welsh woods. Modern science did something incredible. It cleared innocent people who'd lived under suspicion for decades. But it still hasn't given us the one thing everyone really wants: a name. So I want to know what you think. Do you believe the original investigators were right to focus on a stranger, maybe a soldier who slipped away and was never seen again? Or does the evidence make more sense to you if the killer was someone like Ronnie Harris, a man already known to be violent who worked on Muriel's farm and might have been right there in front of everyone the whole time? Right now, the answer is literally locked inside a DNA sequence with no match. It's a really unsettling reminder that even with all our technology, some secrets cling to the past and refuse to let go. Let me know your theories down in the comments. I genuinely want to hear what you think about this one. And if you want to hang out for more dark, unsolved, slightly there's a wolf in the woods kind of stories, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Alright babe, be kind, stay safe, don't walk through the woods alone if you can help it, and I will see you in the next video.